Thanks so much. Can everyone see the share screen on my iPad? Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much to Stephen for inviting me, and thanks so much to all of you for attending the talk right before your spring break. So that's a big thing. So in this presentation, I'll talk about two issues related to question semantics, including mention sum readings and uniqueness effects. So first of all, what is mention sum? In most cases, to answer a question, we want to provide an exhaustive answer. So for example, we'll say that who has presented at logical colloquium this semester, and then we would want to provide all the names of all the speakers, not just one of them. But it's interesting that for double questions with an extensional goal-oriented model such as can, they can be naturally addressed by mention sum answers. So for example, in one, say, where can we get coffee? You can say Starbucks with a volume tone. So that's the natural intonation. And this answer is called a mention sum answer in the sense that it only specifies some of the true answers. So the existence of mention sum answers argues that question interpretations are not always exhaustive. And in the meanwhile, can questions also accept and mention all answers, so answers that specify all the true answers, and can be stated either as a conjunction as in 1b or as a free choice disjunction as in 1c. Then what about uniqueness? Questions with a singular which phrase are subject to a uniqueness effect. So for example, in 2, which child came? So here, child is a singular noun. And this question implies that only one of the children came. And so you wouldn't say this question when you know that multiple children came. You would say who came or which children came, but not which child came. So to account for this uniqueness effect, Dayal 1996 argues that question interpretations must be exhaustive. And she says that a question is defined only if it has an exhaustive true answer. So here arises a dilemma. On the one hand, we see that the existence of mention sum readings argues that question interpretations are not always exhaustive. On the other hand, to account for the uniqueness effects of singular questions, according to Dayal, we do want to say that question interpretations are exhaustive. So that's the dilemma. And in this talk, I'll propose a new question interpretation condition that is called relativized exhaustivity, and hopefully resolves the dilemma. Okay, so this talk will be divided into two parts. Part 1 is on the composition of Kant questions, probably more on the linguistic side. Part 2 is on the solution to the dilemma between uniqueness and mention sum. So this talk is based on manuscript with the same title, with a lot of cuts and simplifications. After part 1, I will save some time, maybe 5 minutes or so, for questions that are directly relevant to part 1. And I'm happy to take clarification questions throughout the talk, but for questions that deserve longer discussions, I'll save them for the final Q&A. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat window. I can also always track the chat window. Okay. Right, so part 1, composing Kant questions. Earlier approaches account for the licensing and the distribution of mention sum interpretations by pragmatic factors, such as the conversational goals of the questioner. So for example, in 3, where can we get coffee? If the goal of the questioner is just to get a cup of coffee, then mention sum answer is sufficient. If the goal is to investigate the local coffee market, then a mention all answer is required. So this sounds pretty straightforward. But as I will argue next, mention sum answers to Kant questions are subject to a grammatical constraint is called mention one only. And this constraint cannot be explained by pragmatics. So therefore, I analyze mention sum as a grammatical phenomena, a linguistic phenomena, and I argue that the primary original mention sum is the presence of the existential goal-oriented modal can, which appears when inside the question nucleus. So, first, what is the mention one only constraint? This constraint says a mention sum answer to a Kant question specifies only one option that resolves the question. So to this extent, when we say mention some, more precisely, we're saying mention one. So to illustrate this contrast, constraint, I'm going to look at the contrast between mention one and mention few in two environments. One is the embeddings of Kant questions, and the other is matrix Kant questions in discourse. So for embeddings of Kant questions, they allow for mention one and mention all interpretations, but not non-exhaustive mention few interpretations, even in cases where mention few fits with the conversational goals the best. So for example, let's look at the conversation in 4. Alice says, we're looking for campus value for the upcoming conference. We need to identify 3 options. Do you know where on campus one can hold a large conference? So here we have a Kant question that is embedded under the effective verb know, and clearly the question goal is mention 3. So in this case, even though the conversational goal is mention 3, the addressee Bob cannot felicitously reply with denial while admitting that he knows one possible value. So in this case, he could say, yes, but I only know one such place. He probably wouldn't say, no, I only know one such place, or sorry, I only know one such place. So this shows that this question wouldn't have a mention 3 interpretation, despite that the conversational goal is mention 3. For matrix cases, in discourse, unlike mention 1 answers, mention few answers are read exhaustively unless ignorance marked separately. So let's have a comprehension task for this scenario in 5. Alice has electronic slides. If you never use this, I include a picture of this, which comes with templates. These plates have different colors and shapes designed for different ingredients. Now, while Alice is cooking, her friend Bob comes to help her to cut carrots. So in this case, Bob says, which plate can I use to cut carrots? If Alice says the green one, she mentions one option, then more likely her answer wouldn't be understood exhaustively. It doesn't imply that the other plates cannot be used to cut carrots. However, if she mentions 2 options, the green one or the black one, then that's a mention few answer, and this answer all of a sudden will more likely to be understood exhaustively. So seems that she implied that the other blades cannot be used to cut carrots. So I tested that in both English and Mandarin. The Mandarin had more data points, more than 600 participants. And basically out of 251 participants who accept the non-exhaustive rating for A, 241 says choose to judge the second one to be exhaustive. So there is a very robust contrast between these two. So, but in comparison for answers to questions with this partiality marker, like for example, there's no contrast between mention 1 and mention few in exhaustivity. So for example, in 6, who is our committee, for example? To this question, no matter whether you mention 1 committee member as in A or 2 committee members as in B, there's no contrast in exhaustivity. Both answers will be understood as non-exhaustive answers. And moreover, one can make an exact mention N inquiry, such like mention 3, say give me 3 examples. So the contrast between Kant questions and X questions argues that the source of non-exhaustivity in these 2 types of questions are different. So next, I'm going to propose a compositional analysis of Kant questions and account for the mention 1 only constraint. Before moving to the actual composition, let me introduce a new concept called Answerhood. So this is the operation that applies to the meaning of a question and returns some proper answers to that question. And it's important for today because now a lot of question properties such as choose and exhaustivity are encoded within the Answerhood operations, not within the question denotations. And previously, people usually say that Answerhood returns something that is exhaustive. Yeah. But then because mention sum is not exhaustive, that idea wouldn't account for mention sum readings. So instead, I follow an idea from Fox 2013, which is a class note. He assumes that the true answer is complete if and only if it isn't asymmetrically entailed by any of the true answers. And such answers are called maximal informative true answers. Okay. So this concept, maximal informativity, is weaker than exhaustivity. So it allows non-exhaustive answer to be a complete answer. And it derives either mention some or mention all, depending on the logical relation of the prepositions in the answer space. So see how this works. Let's compare two answer spaces in 8, Q1 and Q2. And assume that both answer spaces include two prepositions phi A, phi B, which are mutually independent and are true in the world W. But the difference is that Q2 includes also the conjunction of the two prepositions. So therefore, Q1 is not closed under conjunction, Q2 is closed under conjunction. Okay. And then let's see what happens after we apply the Answerhood operator. In A, apply Answerhood operator in W to Q1 returns a non-singleton set containing two prepositions, and none of them is exhaustive. So that gives rise to a mention some rating. While in the second case, apply Answerhood operator in W to Q2 returns a singleton set containing only the conjunctive preposition, and that is an exhaustive answer. So this gives rise to a mention all rating. So basically, Fox Answerhood predicts that mention some arises only if there is a world where the question has multiple maximal informative true answers, and it's unavailable if the answer space of the question is closed under conjunction. So therefore, later when we move to the composition, I'm going to show you that we're going to look at the shape of the answer space. If it is closed under conjunction, then it has a mention all rating. If it is not closed under conjunction, then a mention some rating is possible. Then to see how exactly the structure of mention some question is like, I'm going to look at some other linguistic properties of mention some answers. And previously, I've already introduced the mention one only constraint. And here, there are two additional properties, including local exhaustivity and mutual independence. Now, if you hear any noise from my side, do you hear any noise? Good. All right, thanks. So to show these two properties, let's look at the example in 9. The committee can be formed in two ways. It should either have the two members, Andy and Billy, or have the three members, Andy, B, and Cindy. So to answer this question, who can serve on the committee? We can say B, Andy and Billy can, or say C, Andy, Billy, and Cindy can. And in each case, we're going to specify the composition of full possible committee. But it wouldn't just say Andy can with a volume tone. So the contrast between A and BC argues that a mention some answer is subject to local exhaustivity. So to 9, a mention some answer should specify all of the committee members, all of the members of a possible committee. In addition, observe that answer B is a good answer, even though if we translate B and C as the formula is on the right, then C would asymmetrically entails B. So seeing that B and C are both good answers argues that there should be some device that we can use to keep these two options independent. So to account for these two properties, I argue that there is an exhaustification operator that is applied to the local VP and is associated with the W trace. And this operator, O, which has a meaning similar to only, says that the predicate is true, and any alternative that is not entailed by the predicate is false. So the structure of 9 is given in 11a. We have an O operator embedded under the possibility nodal can and associated with the W trace. Then applying the Answerhood operator in the given situation to Q returns a non-singleton set containing two maximally informative true answers, including it's possible that only A and B serve on the committee. It's possible that only A, B, C serve on the committee. So this analysis accounts for the two properties. The local O operator directly asserts local exhaustivity. So answer 9A is bad, because it is false to say it's possible to have only A serve on a committee. In addition, the O operator is a non-monotonic operator. So this non-monotonicity makes the individual answers mutually independent. 9B, 9C are now translated as the formulas on the right. We have local O operator. So with these translations, C does not asymmetrically entail B. This slide is about first order readings. First order readings mean that answers to the questions are based on individuals, so either like atomic individuals or polarities of individuals. And next slide, I'm going to talk about higher order mission sum interpretations. Those are interpretations where the answers are based on like generalized quantifiers. And this reading arises when the from depth trace binds a higher order trace pi, which has the same type as a generalized quantifier. So assume that to derive a higher order mission sum reading, the higher order trace pi takes scope between the possibility model can and local exhaustifier. So the answer space generated by this logical form is illustrated by this picture. Here we're going to look at three types of possible answers: conjunctive ones, individual ones, and the disjunctive ones. The conjunctive answers are derived by applying the question to Boolean conjunctions. Individual answers applied by Montaguvi individuals, and disjunctive answers are derived by Boolean disjunctions. In both cases, the disjunction conjunction takes scope under the possibility model. Then here inside answer space, we see that each of the formulas refers to one possible answer. The three in shade are true answers to the question in a scenario where only Andy and Billy can share the committee and co-chairing is disallowed. And the arrows indicate the entanglement relation among the propositional answers. So for example, here the disjunctive answer at the bottom is entailed by the two individual answers. And moreover, the disjunctive answer is logically equivalent to the disjunction of the two individual answers. So this is basically to see what this picture means. So now let's see the predictions about on these three types of answers. The conjunctive answer is contradictory. It is contradictory to say it's possible to have only A chair the committee and simultaneously only B chair the committee. The individual answers are independent because of the non-monotonic operator under the possibility model. The disjunctive answer is partial because it is logically equivalent to the disjunction of the two individual answers. So whenever the disjunctive answer is true, there will be an individual answer is true and asymmetrically entails it. So therefore, disjunctive answers are always partial. Also, this analysis explains the mission sum licensing effect of can. With the presence of the possibility model can, the independent answers are not mutually exclusive. Imagine that if we drop the possibility models or replace them with necessity models, then we're not able to have exclusive answers to be simultaneously true. We cannot have multiple exclusive answers to be simultaneously true. In addition, it also explains the mention one only constraint. In reply to a can question with a mission sum interpretation, only the individual answers, which each specifies exactly one option, are possibly maximally informative. In contrast, conjunctive answers are always contradictory, disjunctive answers are always partial. So if the addressee uses a Boolean coordination to specify multiple options, they must be understanding the question not with a mention sum rating, but rather with a mention all rating, which are going to come next. Next slide is about derivation of conjunctive mention all interpretations. We look at two types of mention all interpretations. So because we said that mention all answers can be expressed either as a conjunction or as a disjunction. So this is the case where the answer is expressed as a conjunction. The logical form and the picture given here, I just repeated from the previous slide. Those are for the mention sum rating. And to derive the conjunctive mention all rating, the only thing that I need to change is to reverse the scopal pattern between the possibility model and the higher order depth trace. So now assume that the higher order depth trace takes scope above the possibility model, and then answer space is shifted into the one on the right side. So now you see the conjunctive answer is no longer contradictory. It just means that it's possible that only A chairs and it's possible that only B chairs. And this answer is logically equivalent to the conjunction of the two individual answers. So this answer space is closed under conjunction. the conjunctive answer is the unique maximal informative true answer to the question. So that gives rise to a mention-all reading, where the conjunctive answer is the maximal informative true answer. So that's to derive conjunctive mention-all interpretation. For disjunctive interpretation, more words need to be said. A disjunctive answer to a cont question is read ambiguously with either ignorance or with free choice. Say, who can chair the committee? And your ability can. This answer can be either read as ignorance, with ignorance as in A, but I don't know who, or with free choice, say means that any can chair and B can chair. So in light of this ambiguity of disjunctive answers to cont questions, I argue that in the cont question, a disjunctive mention-all interpretation arises only if felicitous disjunctive answers can be understood as free choice statements, as universal free choice statements. Following the tradition of Kratzer-Shimoyama 2002, I assume that universal free choice is derived by anti-exhaustification. I don't want to go to the exact details about how this is computed, because that's not the focus for today. But the rough idea is that I assume there's something called DO that represents the anti-exhaustification. So when you apply DO to a disjunctive sentence like possible phi or psi, then you give rise to a meaning that's equivalent to possible phi and possible psi. And same thing arises when DO is applied to the disjunction and conjunction over possible psi and possible phi. So in all cases, you get a conjunctive inference. So I'm gonna skip the next two slides unless people really have interest, but you can come back to the Q&A. So basically, for a sentence like in 18, applying DO to a sentence like and your ability can chair the committee, it says that it affirms the pre-adjacent disjunction, possible phi A or possible phi B, and then negates the exhaustification of each of the disjuncts, not only possible phi A, not only possible phi B. So the conjunction of the three inferences together is equivalent to possible phi A and possible phi B. So basically, DO applies to a disjunction and returns a conjunctive inference. So now we're ready to derive the conjunctive mention-all interpretation. This is again just to repeat the logical form and answer space for a mention-sum reading. To derive a disjunctive mention-all reading, all we need to do is to insert an O operator, apply it within the question nucleus about the possibility model, and let it associate with the higher order trace higher order W trace pi. And now on the answer space, each of the proposition is point-wise. So the DO operator point-wise applies to each of the propositional answers. See, DO is applied here. The conjunctive answer on the top remains contradictory, but disjunctive answer now is turned into a universal free choice statement, which is logically equivalent to the conjunction of the two individual answers. So now the answer space is closed under conjunction. There's just one maximum informative true answer to the question, which is conveyed by a disjunction. Okay. So in terms of summary, the mention one only constraint argues that the distribution or licensing of mention sum is impurely determined by pragmatics. I argue that mention sum mention ambiguity in cont questions come from minimal structural variations within the question nucleus. Here I present two factors. One is the scope of relation between cont and the higher order depth trace. And the other is the presence or absence of the anti-exhaustification operator. There are a bunch of other issues such as distribution of mention sum interpretation, non-cont questions, the distribution of free choice, disjunctive answers that I don't have time to talk, but feel free to ask about this during Q&A. Okay, so now I'm done with my first part. If you have questions that are directly relevant to this or clarification questions, we can have some minutes about this.
Actually, if I may, I have a question.
Sure.
And it's just a small thing, but I'm sorry, but could I ask you to go back to an earlier slide where you have example 5, which is about the blades. The blade, which blade can I use to slice the onions? Not the onions, some others, whatever.
Carrots.
Carrots. Okay, yes. I was wondering, so you're using this to illustrate something about the availability of this, mention some thing, and I meant about the mention one only, yes, right.
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't this also an instance of the uniqueness thing that arises with singular WH phrases, which you mentioned at the beginning as a separate kind of constraint?
That's a super good question. We'll kind of come back to more cases like this. The quick answer is that we could have a multiple choice answer to the question when there is a possibility modal, and we could allow the uniqueness to be interpreted locally. So it's like in each world there is a unique blade being used to cut carrots, but it's like so that's local uniqueness instead of saying that there's just one blade that we can use. That's exactly what's gonna come next.
I see. Okay, well then I'll look forward to what comes next.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Right. So if people don't have other questions, I'm gonna move forward. So the second part, the dilemma between uniqueness and mention sum, and I propose a condition called relativized exhaustivity. So the dilemma, let me remind you, say allowing complete answers to be non-exhaustive conflicts with Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, which is important for explaining the uniqueness effects for singular which questions. And I'm going to propose a condition called relativized exhaustivity. This condition has the effect of evaluating exhaustivity relative to the accessible worlds as opposed to the utterance worlds. Basically, now I'm switching to my focus to modality. I'm not an expert on modality, and it's very nice that we have a lot of experts here. So I hope that I can learn from you after this talk. So let me remind you what uniqueness is about. Singular depth questions are subject to uniqueness. Which child came implies that only one of the children came. And to account for this idea, Dayal makes two assumptions. One is called exhaustivity presupposition. She says a question is defined only if it has an exhaustive true answer, which is a true answer that entails all the true answers. And in addition, she assumes that a plural depth question has some based answers while singular depth question doesn't. So let's see how her idea works. Assume that among the children under discussion, only Andy and Billy came. The speaker knows that multiple children came, but she doesn't know who they are. In this case, she could ask which children came. This question has three true answers in this scenario. A came, B came, A and B came. And A and B came, the plural one, is the answer that entails all the true answers. So Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition is satisfied. In contrast, for the singular question, which child came, the true answers include A came, B came, but not the plural one, A and B came. So there is no maximum, and there's no strongest true answer to the question. And then Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition is validated. So that's how she accounts for the uniqueness effect in 21. Dayal's work has been focused on first order readings, and I also want to look at higher order readings, because once we have higher order readings, we can have also generous quantifiers be used to create answers, and then the answer space will be richer. So on higher order depth quantification, the uniqueness effects also argue that singular depth phrases cannot have answers formed out of Boolean conjunctions. So for example, the same question 22, which child came, if this question could have Boolean conjunctions like A and B, then we would have something at the top saying A came and B came, and that would be strong as the true answer to the question, and then we wouldn't be able to use Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition to explain the uniqueness effect. So here you can notice that I assume that the Boolean conjunction cannot be used, but the Boolean disjunctions can be used. So this disjunction conjunction symmetry is also seen in modalized questions. So here I'm having a can question with a singular noun. Which textbook can I use for this class? You can say book A or book B, but you wouldn't say book A and book B. So sounds like if you use a elided answer, a short answer, you can use disjunctions, but not use conjunctions. So because of this, I assume that singular Debit questions may range over atomic individuals, their atomic mutagoing individuals, as well as their disjunctions, but not summations and Boolean conjunctions. So that's the assumption. So far I have mentioned the advantages of Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition in accounting for the uniqueness effects. As for our consideration related to mentioned sum readings, it's also very useful. Without Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, our current proposal over-predicts mentioned sum interpretations. So here, I'm going to look at 3 cases, including questions with a uniqueness presupposition. This is the one I've already introduced. Debit questions with a non-distributive predicate, like form a team, form a committee. And debit questions with extension indefinite, such as one of the boys. I'm going to look at the 3 cases one by one, and maybe that is a little bit more. This part is going to be a little bit complex, but so I hope that people, if anything sounds unclear, please feel free to let me reclarify. So for questions with uniqueness presupposition, let's again assume that both A and B came. This question has a first order rating and a higher order rating. In neither case, the answer space is closed under conjunction. If we use Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition because we are not able to find the strongest true answer to the question, she would predict that the question is subject to uniqueness. However, without Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, we're going to say that these questions are like mentioned sum readings in the sense that it has multiple maximal informative true answers in W. In 25, this is the question with the non-distributive predicate, like form a team. Again, we're going to consider 2 possible ratings. The higher order rating includes answers like A and B form the team, C and D form the team, but also their disjunctions and conjunctions. This answer space is closed in the conjunction, so that's nice. In Dayal would predict that this question is acceptable. And our answer will predict that it's going to be a machine order rating. However, this question also accepts a first order rating, and this answer space contains only propositions based on individuals, and this answer space is not closed under conjunction. So without Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, we have no way to root out the first order rating. We're going to assume that we're going to end up predicting that question is ambiguous between mentioned sum and mentioned all. Clearly, that's a very bad prediction. And finally, for questions with an extension indefinite, such as which movie did one of the boys watch? They also are predicted to behave the same as cont questions in licensing mentioned sum, because so far the only thing that is necessary is to introduce something that has extensional quantificational force to the structure of a question, and then there shouldn't be any difference between a possibility modal versus extensional quantifier. But again, that's the wrong prediction. So so if we don't have Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, we end up over predicting mentioned sum readings. So here's the dilemma. On the one hand, Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition explains uniqueness, but it is too strong to allow for mentioned sum. On the other hand, abandoning Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition makes mentioned sum interpretations possible, but assumed answerhood is too weak to capture uniqueness and also overgenerous mentioned sum. So it looks like if we want to have a good story about mentioned sum, we do want to have an alternative explanation to uniqueness while preserving all the advantages of Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition. So here there are already 2 accounts on the market. One is by Fox, one is by Hirsch and Schwartz. I won't go over the details in the talk. Feel free to those are reviewed in the paper. Now I'm going to move to the issue that I promised to Steve that we're going to look at next, is about local uniqueness. And this it turns out that Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition faces this challenge, which is independent of our considerations on mentioned sum. So modalized singular Debit questions are subject to local uniqueness, regardless of the modal flavor or the modal force. This observation was first made by Hirsch and Schwarz 2020. In 27, which letter could we add to FO_M to form a word? You can say A or R. And the meaning of this answer is that a unique letter that we add could be A and could be R. And similarly, changing the priority modal could with epistemic modal could. Which letter could be missing in FO_M, A or R? It means that the unique letter missing could be A and could be R. Okay. And in addition, modal force that's also changing the modal force also doesn't affect local uniqueness. In 2021 paper, I observed that a similar effects arises in singular questions with a necessity modal. So when you say, which chapter do we have to assign to the students? There is a rating where you mean that we are not allowed to assign more than one chapter. Maybe we don't want to give too much workload to students. We don't want them to be frustrated. So we decide that we're going to just assign one chapter to them. And the possible answer to the question could be like something like chapter 1 or chapter 2, either is good. So Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition applies to the question answer space as a whole. It cannot capture local uniqueness effects, and this problem is independent of our interest mentioned some. Okay, so now I'm going to get into my proposal, starting by thinking about this just using our intuition. Intuitively, uniqueness appears to be local if exhaustivity is evaluated relative to the accessible worlds as opposed to the utterance world. So for the two questions in 30A, which chapter can we assign? Which chapter do we have to assign? In both cases, it seems that it gave rise to a uniqueness inference saying that for every possible world, for every accessible world W prime, if we assign a chapter in W prime, then we'll assign only one chapter in W prime. So this is the intuition. So more generally speaking, a modalized W question of the form possible Q, necessary Q is defined only if the non-modalized counterpart Q satisfies Dayal's exhaustivity requirement in every accessible world where this Q has a true answer. This is the intuition. But how can we capture this idea analytically? It has brought me a huge headache. In modal theoretical compositional semantics, it is technically difficult to extract the non-modalized Q from the modalized Q. So letting alone to evaluate the exhaustivity of this non-modalized Q. Of course, if we don't use modal theoretical semantics, we maybe have some smarter way to do that. But just if you have some thoughts on that, I'm happy to hear. So instead, I propose that idea of relativized exhaustivity can be captured by substituting the modal base, which is the function that maps the utterance world to the set of accessible worlds. Because interpreting Q with respect to an accessible world is just like interpreting the modalized Q with respect to a modal base that introduces a singleton set of accessible worlds. So I hope that this connection is clear. Therefore, I define relativized exhaustivity as in 31. It says that Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition must be satisfied relative to every modal base that introduces a singleton set of accessible worlds which verifies a true answer. This is a long definition. Let me unpack this a little bit. So here, QMW refers to the set of short answers that are true to the question in W. And then here, Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition is rewritten because now I'm defining question as a function that is a function that can take short answers and arguments. Now 31 says Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition is satisfied relative to every modal base M prime, which introduces a singleton set of accessible worlds that verifies a true answer. Okay, so this is the definition. Hope that this will be the idea of this. This idea will be clearer once we see more application cases. The first prediction of this analysis is that it permits mention some readings. let's look at the typical mention sum question. Who can chair the committee? And assume a multiple choice scenario. So here, there are two accessible worlds, W1, W2. The committee is chaired by A in W1 and chaired by B in W2. So in this case, this question has two true answers. A can chair, B can chair. And I use this dotted line to link the worlds with the answers that you can verify. So here, W1 verifies E can chair, W2 verifies B can chair. So then if we're evaluating the question with respect to the original modal base, this question has two true answers. It doesn't have exhaustive true answer. Yeah, because it has this two. However, we can try what happens if we replaced the modal base with ones that would only introduce one accessible world. So that's M1 and M2. If the question is interpreted relative to M1, then A can chair would be the unique true answer to the question, which is also the exhaustive true answer to the question. And similarly, if the question is evaluated relative to M2, it will have only one true answer, and which is also the exhaustive true answer to the question. So given the modal base M, relativized exhaustivity is satisfied in W. So it's a good result. Mention sum is permitted. This is for first order mention sum reading. For higher order mention sum reading, everything works the same. The difference is that now we're adding the disjunctive answer to the picture. But it wouldn't really affect our computation because no matter which modal base I choose, this disjunctive answer is a partial answer. It would be entailed by the individual answers. So everything works the same. So now we can conclude, we can make a generalization of relativized exhaustivity to mention sum interpretations. It says that mention sum interpretations of a Kant question of the four WHA can P satisfies relativized exhaustivity if and only if the interpretations of the non-modalized counterpart satisfies Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition in every accessible world where it has a true answer. Then this analysis also avoids over predictions of mention sum. So for any question, briefly, for any question that doesn't contain a modal, there wouldn't be any difference between relativized exhaustivity and Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition because replacing the modal base wouldn't make any effect to the interpretation of the question. So in particular, for questions with a non-distributive predicate, which children form the team, in a multiple team scenario, the first order interpretation violates relativized exhaustivity, just like how it violates Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition. And in 35, which movies did one of the boys watch? Relativized exhaustivity makes exhaustivity to be evaluated relative to a smaller modal base, not relative to a smaller discourse domain. So there is a contrast between possibility model and an extension quantifier because we're considering a change in the modal base, not changing the discourse domain. Then prediction 3 regarding uniqueness. For non-modalized questions, there wouldn't be any difference between relativized exhaustivity and Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition. And more interesting things arise when we look at modalized questions. There are different kinds of uniqueness. Here, let's just focus on local uniqueness. 37, 38, which chapter do we have to assign? Which chapter can we assign? Both questions give rise to universal local uniqueness inference. So first, let's see the case that involves the necessity model. Which chapter do we have to assign? In one reading, it implies that we shouldn't assign more than one chapter. Here I'm assuming the higher order rating with the W trace being interpreted under the scope of a necessity model. So the answer space will be something like the picture shown here. So for example, if you say chapter 1 or chapter 2, that will be interpreted as we have to assign either chapter 1 or chapter 2, but it's not like but the choice is but either choice is okay. So again, so assume a local uniqueness evaluating scenario. So there are 3 accessible worlds, W1, 2, 3. We assign chapter 1 only in W1, we assign chapter 2 only in W2, we assign both chapters in W3. So W3 is the one that violates uniqueness. So now let's see what happens after we applying the Answerhood operators. In the original modal base, this question has only one true answer. Yeah, has only one true answer. We must assign either chapter 1 or chapter 2. So Dayal's exhaustivity is satisfied, and then it cannot explain why the question would have to be bad, wouldn't want to have a scenario that violates local uniqueness. So that's a bad prediction. In contrast, think about our relativized exhaustivity. Here we have W3, which also verifies the true answer. We must assign either chapter 1 or chapter 2. And then let's try to change the modal base to something that introduces only W3 as the unique accessible world. In this case, the question has 3 true answers. We must assign chapter 1, we must assign chapter 2, we must assign chapter 1 or 2. So then this question has multiple true answers, but not any exhaustive true answer. So relativized exhaustivity is violated. In other words, whenever local uniqueness is violated, relativized exhaustivity is violated. So that is a good prediction. And this contrast between the predictions on the predictions between Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition and relativized exhaustivity also argues that relativized exhaustivity is a mandatory condition for question interpretation. If we just treat it as a salvaging condition to Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, we would expect local uniqueness to be optional or absent in singular questions with the necessity modal. And finally, let's look at the uniqueness effects in cont questions. Which chapter can we assign? It has a rating where it implies that we can assign exactly 1 chapter, but not more. So assuming the same local uniqueness violating scenario, 3 accessible worlds, W1, 2, 3, we assign chapter 1 in W1, chapter 2 in W2, both chapters in W3. Then this question has 2 true answers. We assign chapter 1, we assign chapter 2. And what is interesting that you see that W3 verifies both of the true answers. So in the original modal base, this question has 2 true answers. It doesn't have exhaustive true answer. Then if we change the modal base to something that introduces only W3 as the only accessible world, it wouldn't improve because the answer space would still have 2 true answers the answer space would still have true answers. We can assign chapter 1, we can assign chapter 2. So the question still doesn't have any exhaustive true answer. So relativized exhaustivity is violated in a scenario that violates local uniqueness. And same idea applies to higher order Mishin-Sum interpretations. And now I come to conclude. In this talk, I started with observation. Mishin-Sum answers are subject to a mission 1 only constraint, which cannot be explained by pragmatics. To account for this observation, I argue that Mishin-Sum and Mission-All answers are derived as complete answers by a single Answerhood operation. The Mission-Sum Mission-All ambiguity in cont questions comes from minimal structural variations within the question nucleus. And next, I introduce the dilemma between uniqueness and Mission-Sum. Allowing non-exhaustive answers to be complete would cause a troubling conflict with Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, and this condition is crucial in accounting for the uniqueness effects in questions. And finally, I propose a solution to this dilemma. Question interpretation can violate Dayal's exhaustivity presupposition, but mandatorily presuppose relativized exhaustivity. And this condition permits Mission-Sum where needed without overgenerating it, and moreover, it explains the local uniqueness effects in modalized singular W questions. So that is the talk. Thank you so much for your attention.